You guys have got to hear this. I'm listening to this book on Senator North, and I had to like rewind this 3 times because I wanted to make sure what I heard is what I thought I heard.
Part 1, Chapter 2 of Senator North. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. Senator North by Gertrude Atherton. Part 1, Chapter 2. Betty Madison had exercised a great deal of self-control in resisting the natural impulse to cultivate a fad and grapple with a problem. Only her keen sense of humour saved her. On the Sunday following her return, while sauntering home after a long restless tramp about the city, she passed a church which many coloured people were entering. Her newly awakened curiosity in all things pertaining to the political life of her country prompted her to follow them and sit through the service. The clergyman was light in colour, and prayed and preached in simpler and better English than she had heard in more pretentious pulpits. But there was nothing noteworthy in his remarks, beyond a supplication to the Almighty to deliver the Negro from the oppression of the Southern tyrant, followed by the admonition to the Negro to improve himself in mind and character if he would hope to compete with the whites. Bitter words and violence but weakened his cause. This was sound common sense, but the reverse of the sensational entertainment Betty had half expected, and her eyes wandered from the preacher to his congregation. There were all shades of Afro-American colour, and all degrees of prosperity represented.
Now, funny, she didn't say all shades of African Americans, Afro-Americans, right? And we all have heard that term before. But I mean, it shows you right here. I forget when this book was supposed to have been written, but and I'll look it up. But you know, it just shows you right there that this girl, the story that she has here, had nothing to do. These people had nothing to do with being African or identified with being an African, right? She clearly states that they're Afro-Americans.
Coal-black women were there, attired in deep and expensive mourning.
Wait. Hold on. If you're Negroes, you're slaves brought over here from Africa, then no one ever answers these questions. How did we ever get to the point where we could afford fine, rich garbs and garments? There's a political cartoon, and I've been trying to find it. I was sitting through, and I like to look at the political cartoons because, of course, they say things and they write things that we don't hear spoken today. And one of them had a couple, and they were getting dressed up. The man's in a dress pants and a vest with a watch, and he's trying to help his wife, connect her the fabric that goes underneath her dress. And they said the pride of Idaho. And I'm like, and it was like 1854 or something like that. I'm like, wait a minute, when were our people in Idaho, and what were they doing with all this, fine attire? If we're supposed to be these just, Africans, that had nothing. No one ever talks about, how did we ever get all this? I mean, come on. What was it? Right before the Revolutionary? No, not the Revolution. The Civil War. The senators were upset that they were gonna have to go back to Kentucky and have to be represented by black members of the state, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is Black Wall Street. I hate that term, black, because what was the name of the actual people? What was their identity? What tribe did they come from? How did they end up with all that wealth? Why is it when World War I happened, whites had to go to war, but blacks didn't, and they got to stay there and build up their economic wealth? Think about that, right?
Yellow girls wore smart little tailor costumes. 3 young girls, evidently of a lower middle class.
Well, when it said yellow girls, remember, they said that these are all shades of Afro-Americans. So they're not talking about no Chinese.
Of coloured society, for they were cheaply dressed, had all the little airs and graces and mannerisms of the typical American girl. In one corner, a sleek mulatto with a Semitic profile sat in the...
Do you hear that? A sleek mulatto with a Semitic... Hold on.
Cheaply dressed, had all the little airs and graces and mannerisms of the typical American girl. In one corner, a sleek mulatto with a Semitic profile sat in the recognized had all the little airs and graces and mannerisms of the typical American girl. In one corner, a sleek mulatto with a Semitic profile sat in the...
A sleek mulatto with a Semitic profile. Oh man, I was like, what did she say? I could not believe it. So they know. All this time.
recognized attitude of the banker in church, filling his corner comfortably and setting a worthy example to the less favoured of Mammon. But Betty's attention suddenly was arrested and held by two men who sat on the opposite side of the aisle, although not together and apparently were unrelated. There were no others quite like them in the church, but the conviction slowly forced itself into her mind, magnetic for new impressions, that there were many elsewhere. They were men who were descending the 50s, tall, with straight grey hair. One was very slender, and all but distinguished of carriage. The other was heavier, and would have been imposing but for the listless droop of his shoulders. The features of both were finely cut, and their complexions far removed from the reproach of yellow. They looked like sunburned gentlemen. For nearly 10 minutes Betty stared, fascinated, while her mind grappled with the deep significance of all those two sad and patient men expressed. They inherited the shell and the intellect, the aspirations and the possibilities of the gay young planters, whose tragic folly had called into being a race of outcasts, with all their own capacity for shame and suffering. Betty went home and for 24 hours fought with the desire to champion the cause of the Negro and make him her life work. But not only did she abominate women with missions, she looked at the subject upon each of its many sides and asked a number of indirect questions of her cousin, Jack Emery. Sincere reflection brought with it the conclusion that her energies in behalf of the Negro would be superfluous. The careless planters were dead. She could not harangue their dust. The Southerners of the present generation despised and feared the coloured race in its enfranchised state too actively to have more to do with it than they could help. If it was a legal offence for whites and blacks to marry, there was an equally stringent social law which protected the coloured girl from the lust of the white man. Therefore, as she could not undo the harm already done, and as a crusade in behalf of the next generation would be meaningless, not to say indelicate, she dismissed the problem from her mind. But the image of those two sad and stately reflections of the old school sank indelibly into her memory, and rose to their part in one of the most momentous decisions of her life. End of